I still remember that night as if the snow had never melted since. The wind hummed against the windows like a tired choir, and the scent of pine and cinnamon drifted through the air, wrapping every corner of the house in false warmth. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in many years, I wasn't in my own home. I was in Jamal's big new house, where the walls seemed too clean and the smiles too rehearsed. Everything sparkled, the crystal lights, the polished floors, the expensive laughter that didn't sound real. Yet inside me, there was only the quiet weight of someone who doesn't quite belong. I had spent weeks carving that small wooden box. My hands trembled more than they used to, and the wood wasn't perfect, but it carried something my heart still knew how to give: love. I thought maybe they would understand that, maybe Amanda would smile and see what I meant. I wanted to bring a piece of the past, a reminder that Christmas wasn't about the gifts, but the hands that gave them. But when the paper came off and the laughter came on, I knew I had misjudged the moment. They laughed softly at first, then louder, the kind of laughter that leaves no room for words. Robert made a joke about antiques and old habits, and Jamal just smiled, trying to hide the shame that burned in his eyes. Amanda didn't laugh. She just stared at me, her small fingers tracing the carved letters on the box. Light never forgets where it came from. That was all I said. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain that inside the box there was something more, something I hoped would mean something one day. Instead, I just nodded and thanked them for letting me come. I sat back, letting the voices blend with the crackling fire, the lights, the clinking of glasses. For a moment, I thought I heard Anna's voice whispering near the firewood, telling me to stay kind, to forgive. And I did. Because sometimes the things that look small in the eyes of others are the very things that carry the weight of miracles. That night, they laughed at the old man and his foolish wooden box. But hours later, when the lights went out and the world turned cold, that little box would become the only source of warmth and life left. Funny how Christmas works like that, how it turns laughter into tears, pride into prayer, and a simple gift into salvation. Where are you listening to this story from tonight? Tell me in the comments below. Maybe your Christmas once felt like mine. The morning of that Christmas Eve had started early for me. The sky above the small town of Maple Hollow was the color of cold steel, and the air smelled like snow that hadn't yet fallen. I had packed my old coat, the same one Anna had mended years ago, still stitched at the elbow with a thread that didn't quite match. I placed the wooden box gently inside my bag, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a string. It was all I could give that year, maybe all I ever truly had left to give. When I reached Jamal's house, I hesitated before knocking. It stood tall and modern at the edge of town, a glass-covered monument to a life I had never lived. The driveway shimmered with new snow, and the faint sound of carols played from inside, not the kind sung by voices, but the kind that came from a sleek speaker hidden somewhere in the walls. I smiled weakly. Even Christmas had changed its voice. Jamal opened the door with that familiar polite smile, the one that stretched his lips but never reached his eyes. He hugged me briefly, as if trying not to wrinkle his pressed shirt. Behind him, I saw the warm lights of the tree, the shimmer of silver ornaments, and Robert, already laughing with a glass of wine in hand. Amanda ran forward, her little slippers sliding on the wooden floor, and she wrapped her arms around me with all the honesty left in that house. That moment was worth the entire trip. "It's so good to have you here, Dad," Jamal said, stepping aside to let me in. I nodded, feeling the heat of the house meet the cold of my bones. But as I walked through the doorway, I realized something that struck deeper than I expected. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a house built on the ruins of memories I no longer fit into. The smell of pine and cinnamon filled the rooms, yet beneath it, there was something else: perfume, polished metal, the faint static of electricity humming through the walls. Everything seemed too perfect, too untouched. I looked around for traces of warmth, something human, something like Anna's old knitted stockings or the uneven lights we used to hang, but there was nothing of that sort here. Only symmetry and silence. Dinner preparations were already underway. Robert boasted about his new business deal, Jamal laughed along nervously, and Amanda sat by the window drawing on a fogged pane, making shapes that looked like stars. I stood near the fireplace, watching the flames dance, remembering a time when Christmas meant the smell of fresh bread, the sound of hands clapping flour from dough, Anna's humming as she moved around the kitchen, the fire crackling low and alive. Back then, our house wasn't big, but it was full. We didn't have much, but somehow it always felt like enough. Jamal would sit on the floor playing with scraps of wood I'd bring from the shop, and Anna would tease me for turning every Christmas into a little workshop of gifts. One year, I made her a wooden star to hang on the tree, uneven, rough, but she cried when she saw it. She said it looked like love. Now, standing in Jamal's bright, cold living room, I realized how far we had drifted from those days. I wanted to say something, but words felt like strangers in my mouth. So I just smiled when Robert offered me a drink and politely refused. He smirked, the kind of smirk that hides pity under politeness. I could see it, the way he saw me as an old man with outdated values, a relic from a world that no longer mattered. When we sat down to eat, Jamal raised a glass to toast. "To family," he said, his voice steady but hollow. Everyone echoed the word, family, and took a sip. I noticed Amanda looking at me again. There was something in her eyes, a quiet understanding that didn't belong to a child. She didn't speak, but she smiled, and in that small smile, I saw Anna again. After dinner, I offered to help clean the table, but Robert insisted I sit and rest. I knew what he meant, that I'd only get in the way. So I sat, listening to the muffled laughter coming from the kitchen, the running water, the clinking of glasses. I looked around at the decorations, expensive, beautiful, and soulless. Every light sparkled, but none of them felt warm. My eyes fell on the small wooden box resting on the table beside my chair. I had placed it there earlier, hoping to give it after dinner, when the mood felt right. I ran my fingers along the grain, feeling the roughness where the knife had slipped. Inside, the message waited, a simple phrase that had come to me one night while I was alone by the fire. Light never forgets where it came from. I didn't know why I'd carved those words, but they felt right. Maybe they were for me. Maybe for someone else. As the night grew older, snow began to fall outside, thick and slow, blanketing the streets in silence. I thought of the years that had passed since Anna's last Christmas, of how time had stretched and folded around me like an old blanket. I missed the sound of her voice, the way she'd call my name softly just before midnight, her hand finding mine. Now, all I had was the echo of that memory and the hope that, somehow, tonight would still mean something. When Amanda came and sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder, I knew that maybe it already did. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint chime of distant bells. Inside, I waited for midnight, for laughter, for whatever this Christmas still had left to teach me. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed by the fireplace, listening to the last log sigh and crumble into quiet ash. The house had fallen into that strange silence that only comes after too much laughter, the kind of silence that hums with things left unsaid. Outside, the snow kept falling, coating the world in white forgiveness, as if it were trying to cover everything ugly and cold that the day had left behind. I breathed in the faint smell of pine and smoke, and for a moment, it felt like years ago, back in the house Anna and I built with our own hands. The memory came softly, like a candle flickering in the dark. It was another Christmas Eve, maybe 30 years ago. Jamal was still a boy, his hair wild and his laughter louder than the storm outside. The walls of that old house were thin, but the warmth inside was thick with love. I could hear Anna in the kitchen, humming some carol that never left her lips completely. She wasn't singing words, she was singing home. The tree we had back then wasn't tall or grand. It was crooked, really, a pine I had cut myself from the edge of the property. Its branches leaned too much on one side, but Anna said it had character. She said every imperfection made it more real, more ours. We decorated it with what we could find: paper stars, ribbons from old gifts, the same glass angel her mother had given her. When the lights were off, and only the fire glowed, I'd swear the tree looked alive. I remember Jamal sitting cross-legged on the floor, his small hands carving a little boat out of scrap wood. He wanted to make something for his mother, said it would float in the bathtub. When he showed it to her, Anna smiled in that way that turned the air warm. She said it was the most beautiful gift she'd ever received. And I, standing there with sawdust still in my hair, believed her. Those were simple times, but they carried a kind of peace that I haven't felt since. We didn't have money for fancy dinners or expensive toys, but we had something better, the kind of love that wrapped around you even when the fire went out. Back in Jamal's house, the silence pressed harder against my chest. I could almost hear Anna's voice whispering from the flames, "Don't let the world take the meaning out of things, Sam." She used to call me Sam when she wanted me to listen. I smiled at the thought, but my eyes stung with tears I didn't mean to shed. I stood and walked to the window. The snow outside shimmered under the streetlights, turning everything into a painting of stillness. Across the yard, Jamal's car sat under a thin white blanket. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass, an old man wrapped in years and regrets. Behind me, soft footsteps broke the quiet. Amanda stood there in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly, though my voice barely made it past the room. She shook her head and climbed onto the armchair beside mine. She didn't speak, just leaned close and watched the fire. After a while, she whispered, "Grandpa, do you miss Grandma?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I swallowed and nodded. "Every day," I said. "She's the kind of person you never stop missing." Amanda nodded, her little face glowing in the firelight. "Mom says you still make things by hand." "That box you brought, did you make it?" I smiled. "Yes. I made it for someone special." "Who?" she asked. "For whoever needs it the most," I said. She looked puzzled but didn't ask again. Children understand more than we give them credit for. She yawned, and I carried her to the couch, covering her with a blanket. Before closing her eyes, she whispered, "I think Grandma would have liked it." And with that, she drifted into sleep. I sat there for a long while, watching her breathe, thinking of all the Christmases between then and now, how the years had turned my hand slower, my home quieter, and my heart heavier. I thought of Jamal, of how hard he had worked to become something more than what we were. I couldn't blame him for wanting a different life, but I wished he'd kept a piece of where he came from. There was a time he used to help me in the shop, sanding wood until his fingers turned red. He used to say he'd build me a rocking chair when I got old. I smiled at the memory. I was old now, but that chair never came. The fire finally died, leaving only the faint glow of embers. I sat in the dark, the sound of the house creaking around me. Somewhere upstairs, Jamal and Robert's voices murmured softly, then faded. It struck me how little I knew about my own son's life now, how far he'd gone from the boy who once carved boats out of scrap wood. Outside, the snow thickened. The world was white and still. I thought about Anna's last Christmas, how she'd sat by the window, watching the snowfall, her hands wrapped in mine. She'd said, "If you ever feel alone, just listen to the snow. It sounds like forgiveness." That memory hit me harder than I expected. I could almost hear her voice outside that window now, whispering through the storm. Forgiveness. Maybe that's what this Christmas was asking of me, not to be understood, not to be celebrated, but simply to forgive the distance, the pride, the laughter that hurt. As I finally stood and turned off the last lamp, I looked once more at the small wooden box on the table. The firelight flickered across its surface, making the carved words shimmer faintly. Light never forgets where it came from. Maybe that was what I needed to remember too. And as I walked to the guest room and lay down, the house breathing softly around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would test those words before the night was through. Christmas morning arrived slowly, with a kind of stillness that felt both sacred and heavy. The snow outside had thickened into a blanket of white, muting every sound. Inside, the house had come to life again, soft footsteps upstairs, dishes clinking, the low hum of Robert's voice as he checked his phone for the 5th time. I had woken early, as I always did, long before anyone else. Old habits never leave, even when time tries to dull them. I sat alone at the table with a cup of coffee, watching the light shift through the frosted windows. The wooden box rested beside me, untouched, still wrapped in the same plain brown paper. By the time everyone gathered around the tree, Amanda was already jumping with excitement, her voice ringing like bells. Jamal smiled nervously, and Robert sipped his drink, his phone never far from reach. The gifts under the tree were wrapped in shimmering reds and golds, piled high in a pyramid of excess. My little box looked out of place, a quiet whisper among a chorus of glitter. One by one, the family exchanged their gifts. Laughter filled the room, loud, fleeting, hollow. Expensive perfumes, electronics, branded watches. Robert gifted Jamal a leather-bound business journal and received an imported whiskey in return. Amanda opened boxes full of toys with flashing lights and polished surfaces. Her eyes lit up at first, but the glow faded fast, like fireflies trapped in glass. When it was my turn, I hesitated. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the box and held it out to Robert. "I made something this year," I said, my voice quiet. "Something simple." He raised his eyebrows, took the box with a polite smile, and peeled the paper with forced delicacy. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden case, not perfect, but lovingly shaped. He opened it and found a silver-plated lighter, old but restored, nestled in soft flannel. On the inside lid, I had etched a phrase with care: "Light never forgets where it came from." Robert chuckled. "Well, vintage," he said, glancing around the room. "I suppose we all need something to spark joy these days." He turned the box in his hand, inspecting it like a museum piece, not quite sure what to do with it. Jamal offered a tight smile. "Dad, that's thoughtful." Amanda came closer. "Can I see it?" she asked. I handed her the lighter. Her small fingers brushed the wood, and her eyes widened. "It smells like your shop," she whispered. "Like cedar and smoke." The room quieted, briefly. Then Robert stood, placed the box back on the table, and reached for another glass of wine. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing to explain. I hadn't made that gift to impress anyone. I had made it the way I made everything in my life, with time, with patience, with hands that had lost more than they held. But I won't lie, the silence that followed hurt more than I expected. Not because they didn't like it, but because they didn't see it. They didn't see me. I returned to my chair by the fireplace, feeling smaller than I had in years. The voices behind me faded into new laughter, new jokes, none of them meant for me. And yet, Amanda came and sat beside me again, just like the night before. She held the lighter in her hands, turning it gently. "I like your gift the most," she said, not looking at me. "It feels like it remembers something." That sentence. That small, quiet sentence. It stayed with me longer than any other sound that day. The rest of Christmas unfolded like a play I wasn't a part of. Dinner was extravagant, the wine flowed, and conversation skipped across the surface like stones on ice. Nobody asked me about Anna. Nobody asked what I had done that year, how I had spent my time, or what I remembered when I carved that little box. But I watched. I always watched. And I noticed the distance in Jamal's eyes, how he laughed without joy. I saw how Robert paced near the windows more than he sat, checking for signals, looking out at the storm that was slowly thickening. I saw Amanda drift between the rooms with the lighter tucked in her pocket, as if it were a secret she wanted to protect. That evening, after dessert and another round of drinks, Robert mentioned he might need to run out, something about needing special batteries for Amanda's new toy. Jamal told him to wait until morning, but Robert, stubborn and certain as ever, insisted it would be a quick trip. "Just a short drive," he said, grabbing his keys. "I know these roads." As he stepped out, the snow had already begun falling hard. I stood by the window, watching his car disappear into the white. Something pulled at my chest, a knot of unease I couldn't explain. Back in the living room, Amanda sat near the fire again, the box now resting in her lap. She looked at me and said, "It's not just a gift, is it?" I nodded slowly. "No, sweetheart. It's something you carry when the lights go out. Sometimes, what we call small is what holds the whole world together. A simple gift, made by tired hands, filled with quiet meaning. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of light we forget to honor, the one that isn't bright, but steady. If you've ever given something from the heart and had it dismissed, if you've ever felt invisible during the holidays, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave your story in the comments, because maybe your words will be the light someone else needs." The evening pressed on like a slow tide, covering every surface with its perfect image of holiday joy. The table sparkled with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and plates that looked like they belonged in a catalog. Around it, the family buzzed with laughter, sharp, bright, but empty. The kind of laughter that bounces off walls and dies before it reaches the heart. I sat at the far end, my plate half full, my fork still, watching them through a fog I couldn't shake. Robert poured another glass of wine and made some joke about surviving one more family dinner. Jamal laughed, but his eyes flicked toward me for a second, just a second, like he was checking to see if I had heard. I had. I always did. Amanda played quietly with the flannel lining from the box, now tucked in her sweater pocket. Every now and then, she looked up at me, then back down, as if trying to keep a secret safe in her chest. She was the only soft thing in that room. I looked around and wondered when this place had become so hollow. Not the walls or the furniture, no, it was the people. Everyone so busy performing some version of happiness they forgot how to feel it. There was food on the table, heat in the room, music floating from hidden speakers, and yet, it was colder inside than it was in the storm growing just beyond the glass. The snow outside had begun falling harder. The flakes were thick now, dancing under the porch light in frantic spirals. I stood and walked to the window, letting the warmth of the room fade behind me. Out there, the street was empty, the sky bruised with night, and the air alive with wind. Something in it felt old and familiar, not dangerous, but definite. Like the world was trying to get someone's attention. Robert should have been back by now, I heard Jamal mutter behind me. He said it was just 10 minutes, someone else replied, but no one moved. No one ever does until the silence starts to echo. I stepped outside for air. The cold bit through my coat immediately, settling into my bones like a warning. The snow came fast and sideways, turning everything white except for the flicker of Christmas lights strung around the porch. They blinked unevenly, one or two already gone dark. I stood still, letting the wind speak, listening for something I couldn't name. Anna used to say storms weren't just weather, they were messengers. Moments where the earth tried to tell you what your heart already knew but had forgotten to believe. I remembered her words as I stood there. And I felt it, deep in my chest, something was coming. Not a sound, not a voice. Just a pull. A stillness that demanded attention. I turned back inside, shaking the snow from my shoulders. The warmth hit me like a wall, but it didn't thaw the feeling. Something was wrong. And yet, the room remained the same, the laughter, the lights, the background hum of a holiday that had nothing to do with presents. Jamal looked at his phone, frowning. No signal. I could see the worry creeping in now, just around the edges. But still, they didn't stop the music. Still, they filled their glasses again. I returned to my seat. My food was cold. My hands ached. Amanda leaned against me, her little body warm and quiet. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She felt it too. Then, all at once, the power went out. The house fell into silence so complete, you could hear the snow hitting the windows. The lights vanished. The music died. The warmth stopped flowing. There was a pause, not fear, not yet, just confusion. Then a flurry of motion, Jamal looking for his phone, someone checking the breaker, voices rising slightly. I didn't move. I had lived through blackouts before. I had lived through things much darker than this. Amanda held tighter to my arm. Is it okay, Grandpa? She whispered. I nodded. Yes, sweetheart. Just the night reminding us it's still in charge. They lit candles, turned on flashlights, tried to bring the glow back into the house. But nothing worked the same. Without power, without sound, everything felt exposed. The walls, the faces, the silence. That's when Jamal tried to call Robert again. And again. Nothing. His face tightened. The laughter was gone now. The crystal glasses sat untouched. The food no longer steamed. Something was shifting. And everyone felt it. Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside, the silence grew thick with questions no one wanted to ask. I stood and went to the box. Opened it slowly. The lighter still sat there, nestled in its flannel bed. I held it in my hand, the weight of it grounding me. The words etched inside flickered in the candlelight. Light never forgets where it came from. It wasn't just a phrase. It was a promise. I looked at Amanda. She watched me like she understood more than she should. Then I looked at Jamal. And I said the first thing I had said in a long time. He's been gone too long. Sometimes the quiet before the storm is the loudest thing you'll ever hear. If you've ever had that moment, that gut-deep feeling that something isn't right, long before anyone else notices, you're not alone. Tell me below, have you ever heard silence scream louder than a voice? The night had stopped pretending. No more cheerful lights, no more music floating through hidden speakers, no more soft distractions to dull the edges of truth. The house sat like a shadow against the snow, lit only by flickering candles and the pale blue glow of cell phones struggling to catch a signal that never came. Jamal stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, trying to call again. Nothing. Not even a ring. Just silence. Outside, the snowstorm had thickened into a wall of white. The roads were gone. The world had disappeared into a blur. Robert had been gone for over an hour. The words hadn't been said out loud yet, but they hung there, heavy in the air, between each breath. Amanda sat by me, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Her eyes flicked from her father to the front door, then to me. I could feel her heart beating faster. And mine too. "He should be back," Jamal finally said, his voice low, unsure. "It wasn't that far." Claire, their neighbor who'd come over for dessert, offered a weak smile. "Maybe he stopped to wait it out. You know Robert, he won't admit when he's in over his head." But Jamal's jaw tightened. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, and walked to the fireplace. The candles flickered behind me, shadows dancing along the walls. I opened the wooden box and took out the lighter. Its surface was warm from the fire earlier, or maybe from the memory still held in its grain. Jamal turned to me. "Dad, what are you doing?" I met his eyes that had grown used to power and structure, not silence and storm. "I think it's time to look for him," I said. His eyes darted to the window. "In that? You can't even see past the porch." "I don't need to see far," I said quietly. "I just need to feel where to go." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the man standing in front of him. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he hadn't seen me in years, not really. Then Amanda stood up. She walked across the room and placed something in my hand, the flannel cloth I'd used to line the inside of the box. She didn't say a word. But that simple gesture, giving it back to me, returning a piece of my own gift, said everything. Jamal looked at her, then at me. He exhaled sharply. "Give me 5 minutes. I'll come with you." 10 minutes later, we were outside, flashlights in hand, bundled in layers that still weren't enough against the cold. The snow came sideways now, and the wind screamed like a warning. But we walked slowly, carefully, calling Robert's name into the void. We reached the edge of the neighborhood, where the road dipped toward the old trail that led to the main road. Jamal stopped. "There," he said, pointing. Through the swirling snow, we saw it, faint but unmistakable. Tire tracks. And then, about 50 feet ahead, the glint of metal under a broken tree. Robert's car. We ran. The front end had slammed into a snow-covered ditch, angled hard against a fallen pine. The windshield was cracked. The driver's side door hung open slightly, snow blowing in. And inside, slumped over the wheel, was Robert. Jamal shouted and pulled the door open. The cold hit us like a hammer. Robert was pale, his lips blue, unmoving. For a second, we thought. But then he stirred. A slow, shallow breath. "He's alive," Jamal gasped, shaking him. "He's alive." I reached in and saw something that made me stop. In Robert's lap, still warm from use, was the lighter. My lighter. The one he had laughed at. The one he had almost tossed aside. It had been lit. I could see the burn marks on the fabric around it, the way the flannel had shielded his hands. He had used it. And it had kept him awake. It had kept him warm. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Jamal saw it too. And the look on his face, a mixture of disbelief, shame, and something older, deeper, will never leave me. We pulled Robert out together. We wrapped him in blankets. We carried him back through the storm, each step heavier than the last. And still, he clutched the lighter in his hand like it was the only thing he trusted. Back at the house, the power hadn't returned, but everything had changed. Amanda cried when she saw her father, and Jamal held her close. Claire helped set him on the couch. We gave him water, wrapped him in every blanket we had. He didn't say much, just looked at me once, eyes wet with something beyond words. And I sat by the fire, holding the box. No one laughed now. No one made a joke. The gift that no one wanted had just saved a life. Some storms come to destroy. Others come to reveal. If you're still here with me, tell me this: have you ever given something from your soul, and only later they saw what it truly meant? Tell your story in the comments. Your voice might light someone else's darkness. The storm outside had quieted, as if it, too, was waiting to see what would happen next. Inside the house, the fire burned low, flickering softly, casting shadows that moved like memories across the walls. The power was still out. No music. No distractions. Just breath, warmth, and something none of us could name yet, not fully. Robert lay wrapped in blankets on the couch, his eyes half open, his skin slowly regaining color. His hands trembled as he held the lighter, the same one he had mocked just hours before. He kept looking at it like it didn't belong to this world. Like it was something sacred. No one said much. Words felt too small. Jamal stood near the window, arms crossed, face drawn tight with thought. He kept glancing between Robert and me, as if he were trying to piece together the weight of what had just happened. Amanda sat at the foot of the couch, holding her father's hand, her other hand curled around the flannel cloth I had given her earlier. Claire had gone home. The house, for the first time, felt honest. Quiet, yes, but not cold. I remained by the fire, the empty wooden box beside me. My hand still carried the ache of the walk, the weight of Robert's body leaning against mine, the cold biting through every layer. But deeper than that was something warmer, something I hadn't felt in years. Presence. Real, raw, undeniable presence. After a long silence, Robert's voice broke the room. It was hoarse, thin, but clear enough. I thought I wasn't gonna make it. Jamal walked over slowly. What happened? Robert looked at him, then at me. The car slid off the road. I hit something. Lost power. Couldn't call. Couldn't see anything. His voice cracked. It was cold. So cold. He looked down at the lighter again. Then I remembered the box. It was still in the back seat. Jamal's eyes widened. I used it, Robert said. To light some napkins, old receipts. Anything. It was stupid, but it gave off just enough light, just enough heat. Amanda whispered, "It saved you." Robert nodded slowly. It did. He turned to me then, eyes red. I'm sorry, Samuel. I didn't get it. I laughed at it. I didn't even open it properly. His voice dropped. I didn't deserve it. I didn't respond with words. I just reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked at me like he was still trying to understand how something so small, something made by tired hands and a heart full of silence, could save him when nothing else could. Jamal sat down across from me. His expression wasn't pride or even sadness. It was something deeper. Recognition. You always gave like this, he said quietly. Things that didn't cost much, but somehow mattered more than anything. I looked at him and saw my boy again, the one who used to help me polish wood, the one who once carved a toy boat for his mother, the one who knew the feel of a gift before he knew the price of it. You stopped believing in that kind of giving, I said gently. And I stopped reminding you. He nodded, swallowing hard. I forgot what it meant. What it was all about. I could feel Anna in the room then, not in a ghostly way, but in the warmth that had returned to my son's voice. She would have said something wise, something kind, and then told me to stop crying before I rusted. Amanda stood and walked to me, arms open. I held her close, burying my face in her hair, which still smelled faintly of cinnamon and something else, something like home. The lighter sat between us all now, no longer a novelty or a joke. It had become a symbol. Not of luck or coincidence, but of what happens when love is given with no agenda, no price, and no expectation. It had survived the cold. It had brought back the warmth. And now, it was bringing us all back to each other. Outside, the winds settled. The storm had done its work. It had shaken us. Tested us. Broken our routine. Inside, we didn't return to how things were. Something had shifted. Jamal looked at me again. You made that with your hands. With your time. I made it with what I had, I said. That's all we can ever give. Not what's in fashion. Not what's expensive. Just what we still have left to offer. Amanda held the box, now empty, like it still held something precious. And I suppose it did. Morning came quietly, wrapped in a gray sky and a world still blanketed in white. The power had returned during the early hours, but no one rushed to turn the lights back on. We had all grown used to the soft glow of candles and the hush of a house without noise. Somehow, it felt more honest that way. I stood at the kitchen window, holding a mug of black coffee, watching the snowfall taper off into gentle flakes. The world outside looked cleaner, as if the storm had washed away not just the snow but the weight we'd all been carrying without realizing it. Behind me, the house had shifted. Not in its walls or furniture, but in its air. It breathed differently now. Slower. Deeper. As if something tired had finally exhaled. Robert sat at the table, pale but steady, still wrapped in a blanket. Amanda played near him, folding the flannel cloth over and over like it was a treasure map. Jamal stood in the hallway, staring at the wooden box on the mantel. He hadn't said much since the night before. But something in his eyes had changed. The same man who once sought distance was now quietly walking toward closeness, step by slow step. He turned to me. Do you still have the tools? It took me a second to understand. My carving tools? He nodded. I want Amanda to learn. He looked at his daughter, then back at me. From you. My hands, worn and rough, gripped the mug tighter. I hadn't expected that. Not from him. Not now. I simply said, yes. The moment didn't need more than that. It was an offering, not of words, but of repair. A thread being tied back where it had frayed. We spent the morning together, quietly, but together. Jamal helped me prepare breakfast, and for the first time in years, we moved like we used to side by side, no need to speak every thought. He asked about the wood I'd used for the box. I told him it was cedar, the same kind Anna loved. He nodded like he remembered her voice, her smell, her way of turning something simple into something sacred. Robert remained quiet most of the time, still shaken, but different now. At one point, he stood, walked over to me, and offered the lighter back. I think this belongs to you, he said. I shook my head. It's yours now. It did what it was meant to do. He looked at me, his eyes no longer guarded. Thank you, he whispered. For not giving up on people like me. That's when it hit me, not just the forgiveness I'd been waiting to give, but the forgiveness I didn't realize I needed to receive. Because silence isn't always pride. Sometimes it's pain that never found the right door to walk through. Amanda came over and sat on my lap, laying her head against my chest. Her voice was soft. "Can you teach me how to make boxes like that?" I kissed the top of her head. "I can teach you how to fill them with meaning. That's the most important part." Jamal sat down across from us, his face open, bare. "I'm sorry, Dad. For the way I've treated you. For letting the world tell me what matters more than you ever could." I nodded slowly. "I know." He looked down. I was ashamed of being simple. Of being the son of a man who made things with his hands instead of his name. "And now?" I asked. He took a breath. "Now I wish I'd paid more attention to your hands." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memories, regrets, and something new growing between us. We spent the rest of the day without screens, without music. Just voices, wood, paper, and fire. Amanda drew sketches for boxes she wanted to make. Jamal helped me sharpen the tools. Robert rested, but he smiled more than he spoke. By evening, I looked around the room and realized something had changed forever. Not because someone had almost died. Not because a storm had passed. But because for the first time in years, we saw each other clearly. And once you really see someone, you can't unsee them. I went to the front porch alone, later that night, to breathe. The sky was clearer now. Stars blinked cold and bright above the trees. I thought of Anna. Of her voice. Of her gentle, stubborn love. "I think we're okay now," I whispered. "You can rest." Behind me, the door opened, and Jamal stepped out. He stood beside me in silence for a while. Then he said, "I forgot how the snow sounds." I smiled. Forgiveness always has a sound. You just have to listen through the quiet. He turned to me. "Can we do Christmas at your place next year?" I looked at him. My boy. A man now. "Only if you help cook." We both laughed. Real laughter. The kind that stays. Sometimes, silence isn't distance. Sometimes, it's just a space waiting to be filled with something real. Have you ever forgiven someone who didn't know they needed it? Tell your story below. Someone might be holding the same silence right now. A week passed. The snow melted slowly under a gentler sun, revealing roads and sidewalks again, but something in us remained changed, untouched by the thaw. Jamal called me every day after that. Amanda drew me something new each morning and mailed it to my house with her tiny handwriting on the back, for Grandpa's workshop. Robert, still recovering, sent a message through Jamal the third day. "Tell him I still carry it with me." But more than their words, it was their eyes that had shifted even through video calls. I could see it. The way they now paused before speaking. The way Jamal asked how I was, and then waited for the answer. The way Amanda smiled like she knew a secret, and that secret was simply this: love is louder when it's quiet. When they invited me back for New Year's dinner, I said yes. Not out of politeness, but because I wanted to. When I arrived, Amanda was already waiting at the door with her coat half-zipped and a scarf twice her size around her neck. She pulled me inside and led me to the kitchen where Jamal stood, apron on, face floured, hands sticky with dough. He looked up and grinned. "I remembered the recipe," he said. I stared at the mixing bowl and laughed. "You never liked kneading." He shrugged. "Turns out some things are worth the work." We cooked together that day. Shoulder to shoulder. The same rhythm we used to have in the workshop. The kind of flow that doesn't need music to find its beat. Robert joined us for dinner, and he brought something in a small wrapped box. He handed it to me like it weighed more than it should. I wanted to try, he said. Making something. Inside was a keychain, rough and imperfect, carved from an old piece of driftwood. On it, the initials SR for Samuel Robert. I didn't correct him. It wasn't for me to perfect it. It was his way of saying, I see you now. Later that night, as Amanda sat beside the fire with a sketchbook, Jamal asked if I'd tell a story. Not one from a book. One from before. From when he was little. I looked at them all, gathered in a room that had once felt like a stranger's house and now felt like a place I'd known forever. So I told them about the first Christmas after Amanda's dad was born. How Anna and I had no money, and I carved tiny animals from scraps for him. How he cried anyway, not because he was upset, but because even then, even at 2 years old, he felt the weight of love. I told them how Anna had once said that people don't remember the gifts they receive, they remember how those gifts made them feel. Jamal was quiet for a while after that. Then he said something I didn't expect. You saved him, he said, nodding toward Robert. But maybe you saved all of us. I shook my head gently. No, son. The gift did. And the gift was never just the lighter. It was the reminder. Of what we forgot. Of what we're still capable of. Amanda looked up. What's that? Love that doesn't need to shine to be seen. That night, I went to bed in the guest room, the same place where I had once felt like a burden. But this time, there was a note on the pillow, this is your room now. Always. And just before I turned out the light, I noticed something on the bedside table. The empty wooden box, now filled again, this time with folded notes, sketches from Amanda, and a small photo of Anna smiling in her apron. I held it in my hands, running my fingers over the words I had carved. Light never forgets where it came from. And I finally understood. Because the light wasn't in the fire, or the power, or the lighter that burned through the dark. The light was in the gesture. The persistence. The hands that kept giving even when they were ignored. And that's what Christmas truly is. Not the tree. Not the table full of food. Not the gifts wrapped in gold and ribbon. But the unseen effort. The small, quiet kind of love that keeps showing up, not because it's easy, but because it must. Maybe you've spent Christmas surrounded by noise but feeling completely alone. Maybe you've offered your heart in the form of something small, and they didn't see it. Or maybe you've been the one who laughed, and only now you're remembering what you forgot. Whatever your story is, I hope you carry this with you. Love, when real, never disappears. It waits. It whispers. And sometimes, on the quietest night of the year, it saves. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if this story reminded you of someone you've lost, or someone you need to find again. Don't let the silence keep speaking for you. Reach out. Forgive. Remember. That's what Christmas was always meant to be.